The heat in the Valencia Gates development didn't come just from the South Florida sun. It radiated from the hyper-manicured, meticulously regulated atmosphere enforced by the Homeowners Association. Alex Vance hated it. He hated the endless sea of beige stucco, the unnaturally perfect hedges, and most of all, he hated Veronica Thorne, the chairperson of the Architectural Review Committee and, unofficially, the Empress of Valencia Gates. Alex, a man who built his life around the beautiful, messy realities of restoring classic cars, saw the HOA as a vacuum of personality. His garage, legally permitted and always clean, housed his masterpiece, a 1969 Mustang GT Fastback. It wasn't a standard restoration. It was painted in a deep metallic sapphire that, depending on the angle, looked black or electric blue, a color he called Midnight Coast. The trouble had started 3 months ago with a laminated notice of violation taped to his garage door. Scene, the driveway showdown. Was 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Alex was changing out of his shop clothes, a faded union-made t-shirt and jeans, into something suitable for a beer run, when the sound of heavy diesel brakes tore through the suburban silence. He stepped onto his driveway. A massive flatbed tow truck, painted a dull municipal gray, was backing up to his closed garage door. Standing beside the truck, armed with a clipboard and a posture that screamed, "I demand obedience," was Veronica Thorne. Veronica was an immaculately preserved woman in her late 40s, dressed in a crisp, white linen suit that seemed impervious to the humidity. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect bob, and her expression was one of severe, righteous indignation. Beside her stood a man in a polyester uniform, a representative from Coastal Towing and Recovery, sweating nervously. "Mr. Vance?" Veronica announced, her voice a polished, low-frequency hum that could cut glass. She didn't raise her voice, which somehow made the confrontation feel louder. "This is your final notice. Your vehicle, license plate TX49DZN, remains in blatant violation of the newly ratified aesthetic color palette and curb appeal guideline. Section 314B, the non-compliance period has expired. The board has authorized its immediate removal and impoundment." Alex stopped dead on the concrete. He felt a spike of adrenaline, cold and sharp. "My car? Are you out of your mind, Veronica? I got your stupid violation and I went through the CC&Rs. Section 314 only covers exterior home paint and roof shingles. There is nothing in there about vehicle color, and certainly nothing that grants the board the authority to seize private property from a resident's garage." Veronica sighed, a tiny dismissive puff of air, and tapped the clipboard with a manicured nail. "You clearly haven't been paying attention, Alex. As of last quarter, the board voted to incorporate the Architectural Aesthetics Addendum, AAA2, into the standing rules. Page 12, subsection C, clearly states, any vehicle deemed to be substantially inconsistent with the established community color palette and contributing to negative curb appeal, as determined by the Architectural Review Committee, shall be subject to escalating fines and, ultimately, lien and seizure." The man from Coastal Towing began nervously lowering the tow cable winch. The low guttural noise echoed the rising fury in Alex's chest. "Hold it right there!" Alex snapped, taking a step toward the truck. "You stop that winch now." The tow truck driver hesitated, looking from Alex's fierce stance to Veronica's icy glare. "Continue, Mr. Diaz," Veronica instructed, not even looking at the driver. Her eyes were locked on Alex, challenging him. "The impoundment fee is $4,500, plus a storage fee of $250 per day. It will be released when the car is repainted to a neutral, approved tone, and when the full lien is settled." Alex felt the blood rush from his head. He had spent years and every spare dime on that Mustang. It was his retirement, his identity, his only connection to his late father who had dreamed of the restoration. $4,500? He choked out. "For what? What is this ARA2 document? I checked the county records. The official CC&Rs haven't been amended since 2018. The county records, Alex, only hold the foundational documents," Veronica purred, a chilling smile touching her lips. "The addendum is an internal document ratified by the board. You were mailed a copy. Perhaps you should read your junk mail more closely before engaging in deliberate noncompliance." She pointed to the garage door. "Mr. Diaz, the vehicle." The driver, seeing his payday at risk, started the winch again. Alex had seconds. He had to think fast, and he had to fight dirty because Veronica Thorne was already there. "You're trespassing on private property, Veronica," Alex said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "And if that truck hooks up to my car, I'm calling the police and reporting theft. I will also be suing the Valencia Gates HOA, the board, and you personally for harassment, punitive damages, and attempted grand theft." Veronica didn't flinch. She simply held up a printed document, the lien authorization. "Go ahead, call the police. This is a civil matter covered under Florida Statute 720-3085. The lien has been filed. The only thing you're doing is escalating your legal fees, Alex. The board has endless reserves. You don't. That car is ours until you comply." The tow hook was now mere inches from the garage door. In a split second, Alex made a choice. The physical confrontation was futile. The legal threat was better, but he needed proof. He needed time. "Fine," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of temporary surrender. "You want to play by the rules? I'll play by the rules. I need to see the original signed copy of the Architectural Aesthetics Addendum, AAAQ2. Where is the official board copy held?" Veronica looked surprised. She had expected an explosion of impotent rage. "It's archived, of course. In the HOA office archives? But you won't be needing it. The board's authority is clearly established." "I do need it," Alex insisted, his eyes narrowing. "Because I need to confirm the quorum required for ratification. If the vote wasn't carried legally, the rule is void and the lien is invalid. I'll be at the office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Have the original signed hard copy ready, or I'm calling my lawyer." Veronica's confidence wavered, if only for a fraction of a second. She liked confrontation, but she hated procedural challenges. "Very well. 9 a.m. But don't think this buys you time, Alex. If that car is gone by morning, the sheriff will be notified of its removal to avoid impoundment, which is a criminal offense." Alex watched the tow truck drive away, the oppressive silence of Valencia Gates settling back in. He waited until the last rumble had faded before unlocking his garage, pulling the heavy door down with a deafening clank and collapsing onto a workbench stool. Scene. The documents Alex didn't sleep. He sat hunched over his kitchen island, bathed in the harsh white light of his fluorescent overhead lamp. Spread out before him were the documents he had on hand, his own copy of the official 2018 CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the board meeting minutes from the last 5 years, and the 3 violation notices Veronica had sent regarding the Mustang. He needed to find the source of her power. The Architectural Aesthetics Addendum 2. He searched the minutes. Nothing. He searched the community website. Only the 2018 CCNRs. The tension was a tight knot in his stomach. This wasn't just about the car. This was about Veronica Thorne's absolute control, the petty tyranny that had ground down the entire community's spirit. He focused on the final, printed lien authorization document that Veronica had flashed at him. He hadn't just seen the $4,500 impound fee. He'd looked at the footer of the document. The footer stated, HOA Lien Authorization, VGF 48B, Reverend 2020-301. He pulled up the original fine schedule from the 2018 CCNRs. Violation Fine Schedule, VGF 48B, Reverend 2018-04. The old schedule, the one registered with the county, capped aesthetic fines at a cumulative maximum of $1,000 before legal mediation was mandatory. The new lien authorization, the one used for the $4,500 fee, was clearly based on a revised document. Reverend 2023.01. Alex started tracing the flow of money. If the lien was for $4,500 and the old maximum was $1,000, where did the extra $3,500 go? He found the single line in the 2018 CCNRs describing fine revenue allocation. All collected fines shall be deposited in the general operating fund to offset administrative costs and minor infrastructure repairs. Now, for the key. He pulled out the most recent quarterly financial statement the HOA had been required to send out. Veronica's signature was on the attestation page. He cross-referenced. The line items in the general operating. Fund against the reported income. The quarterly report listed $18,000 in aesthetic fine. Revenue, a suspiciously high number for a community of only 120 homes, especially given the old $1,000 cap. But then he noticed a footnote tucked away on the third page of the balance sheet under Special Assessment. Reserve, ARC Projects. This reserve fund was something he had never seen before in any previous financial report. It stated its source of funding was 75% of all revenue generated by the Aesthetic Color Palette and Curb Appeal Guideline, Section 314B, AAA 2. Alex's hand started to shake. The total collected revenue for the Special Assessment Reserve, ARC projects, for that single quarter was $1.35 million. He reread the number. $350,000 in 3 months. But how? If the entire community of 120 homes was fined the maximum $1,000 under the old rules, the total would only be $120,000 per quarter. And that money was supposed to go to the general operating fund, not a special assessment reserve. The only way. The air in the Valencia Gates HOA Community Center at 8:58 a.m. was the temperature of the dead, air-conditioned to fight the oppressive heat outside. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented industrial cleaner and expensive stale coffee. Every framed, generic watercolor on the wall seemed to scream conformity. Alex Vance walked in wearing clean jeans, a slightly too nice polo shirt, and a pair of worn leather dress shoes. The clothing was an intentional compromise, respectable enough not to look like a threat, but grounded enough to show he wasn't playing the suit-and-tie games of the Valencia Gates elite. Hidden in the inner pocket of his polo, secured with 2 pieces of adhesive tape, was the small digital audio recorder. Behind the marble reception counter sat a young woman named Maria, early 20s, whose tired, cynical eyes suggested she had spent many months navigating the passive-aggressive battleground of the HOA. She was processing a stack of beige envelopes that looked suspiciously like violation notices. "Good morning. Mr. Vance," Maria said without looking up. Her voice was flat. "You're here for the 9 a.m. meeting with Ms. Thorne?" "That's right, Maria," Alex replied, leaning on the counter, keeping his voice low and approachable. "Just here to review a document as requested. Is Veronica ready?" Before Maria could answer, the frosted glass door to the inner offices slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. Veronica Thorne stepped out, looking even more formidable than the previous day. Her suit today was a pale dove gray, her demeanor radiating the unshakable certainty of a person who believed they were never wrong. "Alex," she greeted, her tone one of tired tolerance, as if dealing with a child who refused to take their nap. "I trust you haven't moved your vehicle?" "The lien remains active. The Mustang is where I left it, Veronica," Alex confirmed, matching her formality. "And the lien remains invalid until you can produce the documentation proving the authority for its execution." "Where can we review the addendum?" Veronica gestured toward the door she had just exited. "In my office. This won't take long. I have a luncheon at 10:30. Scene, the HOA office, the interrogation. Veronica's office was minimalist, cold, and overlooked a synthetic-looking reflection pond. She sat behind a massive, sterile white desk, placing a thick, stapled booklet in the center. "Here it is, Alex," she announced, leaning back. "The Architectural Aesthetics Addendum, AAA 2, ratified by the Board of Directors on January 4th, 2023. You'll note my signature here as ARC chairperson and the signatures of the required 3/5 quorum of the board members here." Alex didn't touch the document immediately. He just stared at the signatures, trying to commit the shape of the ink to memory. 3/5 quorum. He knew the official CCNRs required a majority vote of the entire membership for any amendment that directly altered the fine schedule. Not just a vote by the board. This addendum claimed to have bypassed the entire community. "Thank you, Veronica," Alex said, his voice calm. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the quarterly financial statement, the one showing the $135 million windfall. He laid it flat on the desk right next to her hand. Veronica's eyes flickered down, briefly scanning the page, specifically the number $135 million under the Special Assessment Reserve, ARC projects. The smile vanished from her face. "What is this?" she demanded, picking up the document, her composure cracking ever so slightly. That, Alex replied, tapping the document gently, is the reason the 8AA2 is invalid. Regardless of the signatures you have here, any document that fundamentally changes the fine structure, as this one clearly does by introducing liens for aesthetic violations, requires a full community vote. Furthermore, look at the footnote. He pointed to the line about the reserve fund. 75% of all revenue generated by the aesthetic color palette and curb appeal guideline, Section 314B, AAA2. This footnote explicitly links the new high-value fine schedule to this special assessment reserve, Alex continued, a reserve which is, curiously, not mentioned in the 2018 CC&Rs, and which has apparently accrued $135 million in a single quarter. Where is that money going, Veronica? And why is it suddenly classified under ARC projects when the old fine revenue went to general operating? Veronica Thorne was masterful at deflection. She put the financial statement down, her hands clasping tightly. That is irrelevant, Alex. The board has the right to establish internal reserves for future capital improvements recommended by the Architectural Committee. We are planning a major revitalization of the main gate entrance and a new security patrol service. This is responsible governance. And the $850,000 paid out to Paradise Land and Maintenance, LLC? Alex asked, hitting her with the second barrel. A landscaping company owned by your husband, Vincent Thorne, the vice chair? Is that part of the revitalization? The blood drained from Veronica's face. The shock was visible, stark against her flawless makeup. This was information she thought was buried deep in public records. That is slander, Veronica hissed, gripping the edge of her desk. My husband's business provides legitimate consulting services to the board. It has nothing to do with your petty car dispute or the lien on your property. It has everything to do with it. Veronica, Alex countered, leaning forward slightly, dropping his voice lower, forcing her to lean in to hear the crucial point. Because if I can prove that the 802 was never legally ratified, if those signatures are forged, or if the process was flawed, then every fine levied under it is void. Every cent of that $135 million is fraudulently acquired. And every cent of that $850,000 payment is criminal theft. He paused, letting the word criminal hang in the sterile air. Now, I don't want to get the FBI involved. But before I call my lawyer, I need to take a high-resolution, time-stamped photograph of this original signed document, specifically the page with the signatures, as well as the accompanying minutes showing the vote tabulation. I need to authenticate the document trail. Veronica stood up, towering over the desk. You are not permitted to photograph proprietary HOA documents, Alex. You may only review them under supervision. And the official minutes are on file, but not here. They are with the management company's off-site archivist. Then I need the contact information for the off-site archivist, Alex stated, unmoving. He knew he wouldn't get the physical paper from her. He needed a way to get the real paper. I require the name and number of the person who handles the physical archive storage, specifically for documents generated in the last 3 years. Veronica stared at him, her eyes dark and calculating. She realized Alex wasn't some hot-headed mechanic. He was a methodical threat. I will have Maria give you the contact details. Now get out of my office. Scene, the reception desk, the ally. Alex walked back to the reception area. Maria was still there, but she wasn't looking down at the envelopes anymore. She was watching him, a flicker of something unreadable. Fear, maybe, or something akin to hope, in her eyes. Veronica's voice crackled over the intercom. Maria, give Mr. Vance the archival access protocol contact information and clear the line items for the coastal towing lien. Do not process that charge. Maria jumped slightly, the request clearly surprising her. She quickly jotted down a name and number on a sticky note. She backed down? Maria whispered, her eyes darting toward Veronica's closed office door. Temporarily, Alex whispered back, taking the sticky note. The name was Centralized Records. @TN, Mr. David Jenkins. The number was a generic corporate line. Useless. Maria, Alex said, dropping his voice even lower. I know what's going on here. I saw the financial statements. The $135 million? The fines, the vendor payments to Thorne's husband. Maria's face went pale. She glanced quickly around the empty lobby. Mr. Vance, I can't talk about that. I just processed the paperwork. I know you do, Alex insisted, maintaining eye contact, making himself vulnerable. I know you're the one typing up the notices, processing the checks. You've seen the stacks of violations. You've seen how many good people have been crushed by these bogus fines. I saw Mrs. Rodriguez's foreclosure notice last month. Did that fine start with the ABA too as well? Maria's eyes welled up instantly. She nodded almost imperceptibly. She was $15,000 behind. They fined her for the color of her mailbox flag. It was red. Said it violated the secondary color accent guideline, Section 41A in the AT2. They're destroying this community, Maria. And you're the one on the inside, processing the destruction. That's a lot of liability if this goes criminal, Alex pressed. Not as a threat, but as a shared truth. I need the real address of the archives, not the corporate contact. I need to find out where the physical documents are stored, because I need to prove that Veronica forged those signatures. Can you help me find the real address where those minutes and addenda are physically kept? If I get the proof, this stops. For Mrs. Rodriguez, for me, and for you. Maria nervously fidgeted with her necklace. The thought of exposing Veronica was terrifying, but the thought of complicity was worse. She was just trying to pay for college, not cover for a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. The off-site place is called South Coast Vault and Storage, Maria mumbled, pulling a small, embossed card from her wallet. She handed it to him. It's in an industrial park off the 95 corridor. The board rents an access box. Veronica, Mr. Thorne, and the management company CEO, a man named Mr. Hayes, are the only authorized people with keys and... Vincent Thorne was not a graceful attacker. He was a wealthy man accustomed to issuing orders, but years of expensive steak dinners and high-end scotch had given him a heavy, predictable center of gravity. He lunged like a bull, not a predator. Alex, however, had spent his life underneath cars, twisting his body into impossible positions, dodging dropped tools and hot oil. He reacted on instinct. He ducked under Vincent's initial clumsy haymaker, which struck the metal shelving unit with a deafening crang. The impact sent a cascade of old, dusty file boxes raining down around them. "Get him!" Veronica shrieked, her voice high and ragged, stripping away her veneer of calm authority. She stepped back, pulling Mr. Hayes with her, clearly expecting her husband to subdue Alex instantly. The small, climate-controlled archive room was now a cage. Alex shoved his satchel hard into his lower back, using it as a makeshift armor plate. He needed space and a weapon, and the cluttered room offered nothing but paper and metal shelves. Vincent turned, his face purple with exertion and rage. "You think you can steal from us, you grease monkey?" As Vincent charged again, Alex spun, grabbing the nearest obstruction, a full box of 2021 financial audits. He used the sharp, heavy corner of the cardboard box like a shield, smashing it into Vincent's face. The box exploded, raining outdated expense reports and dusty paper everywhere. Vincent stumbled back, momentarily blinded by the financial debris. This gave Alex the critical 2 seconds he needed. He sprinted toward the door, which Veronica and Hayes were still blocking. Hayes was a tall, thin man in a bespoke suit, looking utterly terrified. Veronica was pulling a small, expensive-looking pepper spray canister from her purse. Alex didn't stop for finesse. He threw his shoulder into the door frame, kicking out his right leg in a sweeping motion that caught Hayes directly in the knee. Hayes yelped, collapsing sideways, dragging Veronica down with him in a tangle of limbs and expensive linen. Alex vaulted over them, landing hard on the cold, concrete floor of the main vault hall. He was out. He's loose. "The car! Get the car keys!" Veronica screamed, scrambling up. Seen. The vault. Run, Alex ran. Not back toward the front lobby where Gary was still dazed, but toward the wide, empty loading dock door marked out. He heard the thundering, heavy footsteps of Vincent Thorne close behind him. The loading dock was sealed by a massive rolling steel door. It required a separate key card, and Alex didn't have one. He slammed his body against a large metal emergency fire exit bar. Nothing. This place was a bank vault for paper. Vincent rounded the corner, breathing heavily, but gaining speed. He was closing the gap. Alex's eyes frantically scanned the dock. Pallets, shrink-wrapped boxes, and a single, heavy-duty forklift parked near the rear wall. The keys dangling innocently from the ignition. A reckless, insane idea flashed through his mind. Vincent was 50 feet away now. "Stop, you idiot! We'll let the police handle this!" "Stop!" Alex ignored him. He sprinted to the forklift, jumped into the seat, and shoved the key into the ignition. The industrial diesel engine turned over with a deep, authoritative roar, momentarily drowning out Vincent's curses. He jammed the gear shift, dropped the clutch, and spun the heavy machine around, the squeal of the thick rubber tires grating against the concrete. The entire warehouse echoed with the noise. Vincent skidded to a stop, utterly astonished. Just as Alex aimed the two steel tines of the forklift straight at the only exit, the reinforced back door. Alex accelerated. "Alex, no!" Veronica's shriek was swallowed by the sudden, violent impact. The escape. The steel tines, designed to lift tons of cargo, struck the reinforced steel door just above the emergency lock mechanism. The entire building shook. The door buckled inward with a sound like a small bomb detonating. The frame tore from the concrete, sending dust and fragments of metal flashing into the air. Alex immediately reversed the forklift, his body vibrating with adrenaline. A massive hole, jagged and smoking, was now the exit. He jumped out of the forklift, running low and fast through the hole. He landed outside in the blinding Florida morning sun, amidst the scrub grass of the industrial park. He saw his white van parked 50 yards away. He heard the alarm klaxons of South Coast Vault and Storage begin to wail, a deep, rhythmic blast of sound that signaled total, irreversible breach. He didn't look back. He ran to the van, yanked the door open, threw the satchel onto the passenger seat, and slid into the driver's seat. As he was starting the engine, he saw them. Vincent, Veronica, and Hayes pouring out of the wrecked doorway, their clothes stained with concrete dust, their faces contorted with absolute desperate fury. They weren't calling the police. They were running for their black high-end SUV parked 10 spaces away. They knew the police would involve paper trails and questions about why a simple HOA board was chasing a resident through a fortified archive. They needed to clean up the mess themselves. Alex peeled out of the lot, his tires screaming, leaving a cloud of rubber smoke that swallowed the three figures momentarily. He knew they would follow. Scene. The refuge Alex drove for an hour, taking side streets, swapping lanes, and finally ditching the van in a public parking garage near the airport. He took a cab to the only place he trusted, his old mentor's garage, Ironheart Restorations, an independent shop miles outside the oppressive jurisdiction of Valencia Gates. Joe Pops Serrano, 60s, tough, kind, hand-stained permanently with engine oil, was the only person Alex called. Pops didn't ask questions when Alex burst into the shop, pale and shaking, carrying a dusty satchel. He just pointed to the small, insulated office in the back. Showers running. Talk when you're human. 40 minutes later, Alex sat opposite Pops, nursing a cup of black coffee. He spread the physical evidence on Pops's cluttered desk, the high-resolution photos of the forged signatures, the financial statement showing the $135 million fraud, the transfer slips to Coastal Aesthetics Holding S.A., and the crucial handwritten note, Project Sapphire Mustang. They were trying to seize the Mustang, Pops, but the car was just a lever. A $4,500 charge to keep the ledger balanced. They used the custom paint job, My Midnight Coast Sapphire Blue, as the code name for the whole operation, Project Sapphire. They've been running this for 2 years. I figure they've skimmed at least $10 million from the community in bogus fines and vendor payouts. Pops picked up the photo of the transfer slips, his brow furrowed. Cayman Islands. That's not petty theft, kid. That's RICO territory. These people aren't just power tripping. They're professionals. We have to go to the police, Pops. Or the FBI. Pops shook his head slowly. You go to the police now, Alex. They see a mechanic who just committed felony breaking and entering and grand theft of a forklift. Your evidence, the photos, they'll call it fruit of the poisonous tree. And the FBI? They move slow. Hayes and the Thorns will have those offshore accounts scrubbed and be on a private jet before the affidavit is typed up. So what do we do? Alex asked, defeated. We fight fire with fire, Pop said, tapping the photo of the HOA financial statement. They need silence to operate. We need noise. You don't go to the FBI. You go to the community they're stealing from. You use their own rules against them. Scene, the emergency dissemination. Alex knew Pops was right. The Thorns' power was absolute until their victims knew the truth. They needed a shockwave. He used Pops's high-speed commercial-grade printer and copier. He organized the evidence into a single, devastating two-page flyer. Page 1. The line is a lie. Large headline. It showed the side-by-side comparison of the real 2018 fine schedule versus the fake AAOA2 fine schedule. It highlighted the $4,500 fine for his car. Page 2, follow the money. It showed the screenshot of the $135 million accrued in the unapproved special assessment reserve, the $850,000 payment to Vincent Thorne's company, and a clear annotated image of the Cayman Islands transfer slip. The headline read, "Wake up, Valencia Gates. You are being robbed." The distribution had to be immediate, anonymous, and total. By 9:00 p.m., Alex was back near Valencia Gates, this time in Pop's beat-up, unmarked pickup truck. Pops drove slowly down every pristine, manicured street. Alex, wearing a dark hoodie, jumped out at every cluster mailbox and shoved a neatly folded flyer into every single box, securing it with tape so it couldn't be ignored. He was a phantom, working with the practiced speed of a midnight paperboy. The community had to wake up to the truth at dawn. The major turning point at 11:30 p.m., they finished the last street. They were driving out of the main gate when Alex's phone, a secured burner he'd picked up, buzzed with a single text message from Maria, the HOA secretary. Unknown number, fearful. All caps. They know. They found Gary. They are at your house. They are going after the car again. They have a new truck, not coastal, bigger. Be careful, I'm out. Alex's blood ran cold. He had assumed the Thorns would be scrambling to cover their tracks, not escalating the fight. They hadn't called the police. They had mobilized a cleanup crew to silence the only living witnesses and eliminate the first piece of evidence they had failed to seize, the Mustang. They're at my house. Pops. They know I was there, Alex said, his voice flat with horror. They're trying to seize the car permanently this time. If they get that car, they crush it, Pops stated, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. They don't want it repainted. They want Project Sapphire destroyed. Pops took an immediate right. Pops slammed the pickup into park 2 houses down from Alex's cul-de-sac, killed the lights, and cut the engine. The only illumination came from the massive matte black tow truck backed up against Alex's garage. Its warning lights pulsed a silent, malevolent yellow. Standing next to the truck was Veronica Thorne, arms crossed, overseeing the operation. Beside her were 2 figures in dark, tactical uniforms. They weren't tow operators. They were hired muscle, cleanup specialists. She's not even trying to hide it now, Alex whispered, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They're not using coastal towing. This is private recovery, Pops. They plan to make it disappear permanently. Pops reached under the seat again, confirming the presence of the heavy steel tire iron. They think this is a business transaction? We're about to remind them it's a street fight. You take the driver's side, guy, I'll take the other. Focus on the winch. We shut down that motor, we buy time. They're armed, Pops. Look at their stance, Alex cautioned. They're paid to look tough, kid, not to go to prison over an HOA dispute. They'll fold the second the risk outweighs the reward. Get the tire iron, and stay low. They exited the truck on silent, practiced feet, Alex with the heavy tire iron, Pops with a slightly smaller, more manageable wrench he always kept for emergency bolts. They moved through the perfectly manicured landscape, sticking to the shadows between the meticulously uniformed stucco homes. Scene. The confrontation. The heavy hiss of the tow truck's air brakes was the only sound besides the low, grinding whine of the winch as the steel cable was fed toward the garage door lock. One of the hired men, a brute with a shaved head and thick neck, was talking into a headset. Veronica stood watching, the yellow tow lights reflecting ominously in her eyes. Alex and Pops closed the final distance, creeping up behind the tow truck's massive rear tires. "Wait for it," Pops breathed. "Wait for the hookup." The driver, a man in a dark polo shirt, stepped out of the tow truck cabin. He was maneuvering a thin metal insertion tool into the slight gap beneath the garage door, trying to engage the internal manual release lever. "They're going in," Alex murmured. "Now!" Pops roared. Pops launched himself at the nearest man, the one with the headset, slamming the heavy wrench into the man's thigh. The man yelled, a sharp, choked sound of pain, dropping his headset and clutching his leg. At the same instant, Alex burst from the darkness toward the driver's side of the truck. The second guard, seeing the sudden chaos, turned and reached inside his jacket. Alex didn't hesitate. He knew the goal wasn't a fair fight. It was disruption. He swung the tire iron, not at the guard, but at the rear panel of the tow truck, directly above the fuel filler neck. Bong! The heavy steel rang out like a bell, the sound echoing violently through the silent cul-de-sac. Veronica Thorne spun around, her eyes widening in stunned terror. "What the?" The guard pulled out a sleek black baton. "Freeze! Get on the ground!" "It's over, Veronica," Alex shouted, keeping the tow truck between himself and the guard. "I've got the proof! The police are on their way!" That was a lie, but it was the only weapon he had. The guard hesitated, looking at Veronica. His risk assessment matrix was recalculating wildly. He was hired to seize a car, not engage in an armed confrontation with a lunatic mechanic wielding a tire iron. "He's lying! He's trespassing! Secure the vehicle!" Veronica shrieked, her voice frantic, completely losing her composure. Pops, meanwhile, was wrestling with the first guard, who was now stumbling away, trying to keep his balance while Pops harried him with the wrench. Alex saw his chance. The driver, startled by the noise, had abandoned his tool and was backing away from the garage door. Alex darted around the back of the tow truck, heading straight for the vehicle's engine. The guard took aim with his baton, rushing toward Alex. "I said stop!" Alex dodged a glancing blow from the baton, then slammed the tire iron down onto the tow truck's massive rear lift control panel, shattering the plastic casing and sparking wires. The hydraulics powering the winch instantly seized up with a loud whoosh of escaping pressure fluid. The crane arm froze in place. "You idiot!" Veronica screamed, rushing forward, her face a mask of disbelief. "That was a $300,000 truck. You just destroyed evidence. You destroy evidence. I destroy your way of moving it." Alex fired back, turning his attention to the garage door. The driver's initial tampering had left the internal release slightly compromised. He didn't need to lift the heavy door entirely, just enough to get inside. Alex jammed the end of the tire iron under the bottom seal of the garage door, leveraged his full weight, and heaved. The door groaned, the seal tearing slightly as it lifted maybe 6 inches off the ground. "He's getting in!" Vincent Thorne, who had arrived silently in their black SUV, roared from the end of the cul-de-sac. He sprinted toward the scene. Alex slipped the satchel with the evidence over his head and onto his back. He dropped to his stomach and squeezed under the gap, the metal bottom edge scraping against his back. He was inside the garage. The scent of motor oil and leather, the air of home and refuge, enveloped him. Seen, the engine roar. The Mustang stood in the center, gleaming in the artificial light, Midnight Coast Sapphire, the code name, the proof, the target. Alex jumped into the driver's seat. His keys were thankfully hanging on the hook beside the door. His hands, usually so steady working a wrench, trembled as he jammed the key into the ignition. He needed to get the Mustang out of the garage, and he needed to use the garage door to his advantage. Outside, he could hear the chaos, Pops yelling, the 2 security guards trying to corner him, and Veronica's hysterical screaming, amplified by the sudden arrival of Vincent. The Mustang's engine is loud. Alex knew the sound alone would wake the entire cul-de-sac. He turned the key. The massive V8 roared to life, a deep, aggressive, untamed sound that felt like a challenge thrown down in the face of the HOA's manufactured silence. The roar was instantaneous. It bounced off the stucco walls of the neighboring houses. A light flicked on in the house directly across the street, the notoriously nosy Mrs. Henderson. Alex quickly reached the button on the wall and hit the garage door opener. The heavy door began its slow, grinding ascent. He watched through the windshield as the light flooded out and caught the scene. Veronica and Vincent, frozen in the middle of the street, staring at the opening garage door like a tomb lid rising. The two guards were retreating from Pops, realizing the situation had gone from a stealth recovery to an open, televised emergency. As the door cleared the height of the Mustang's roof, Alex slammed the shifter into reverse, feathering the throttle. The Mustang shot backward onto the driveway, its tires momentarily smoking on the asphalt. Scene. The noise and the neighbors, the car was out. The evidence was mobile. Alex spun the car in a wide, desperate arc, its tail sliding slightly on the wet pavement. He saw Vincent Thorne break cover and charge the car. Vincent lunged for the driver's side door handle. Alex reacted instantly, flooring the pedal. The Mustang lunged forward, and Vincent's hand slipped off the handle, sending him sprawling across the driveway. Suddenly, the night wasn't silent anymore. Lights were flicking on up and down the street. Doors were opening. The full community was waking up to the sound of the tow truck alarm, the V8 roar, and the sight of their HOA chairwoman and her husband chasing a car in the middle of the night, surrounded by hired goons, a man in a bathrobe. Mr. Harrison from 2 doors down stepped onto his porch. "What in God's name is going on, Veronica? Is that a tow truck?" Veronica, seeing her world collapsing under the glare of actual witnesses, pointed a shaking finger at Alex. "He's a criminal. He stole property. Call the police." "I didn't steal anything, Mr. Harrison," Alex yelled over the rumble of the engine, pointing his free hand to the man on the ground. "Veronica Thorne and her husband Vincent just tried to destroy this car because it's the code name for the $10 million scam they ran on all of us. Check your mailboxes at dawn. I left the proof of the Cayman Islands account in your mail." The word Cayman Islands hung in the air, instantly cutting through the noise. Harrison's jaw dropped. Alex saw Pops running to the pickup. He had secured his end. Now Alex had to secure the evidence. He put the Mustang into first gear. He gave a final, defiant look at Veronica, whose face had gone completely slack, the realization hitting her. The community knew. The fight was over. The game had changed. He drove past the Thornes' sleek black SUV and the abandoned, broken tow truck. As he sped toward the main gate, he saw one last thing in his rearview mirror. Mrs. Henderson, still in her robe, was already walking down her driveway toward her mailbox, confirming the truth with her own hands. Alex didn't stop until he was miles away, the Mustang humming a victorious, deep baritone on the open highway. The evidence was safe. The community was awake, but the Thornes were still free and their offshore funds were still intact. The legal battle had just begun. The sun rose over Valencia gates, not on the quiet, manufactured perfection of a wealthy community, but on a war zone. Police cruisers cordoned off Alex's cul-de-sac, their blue lights flashing over the shattered, silenced remains of the $300,000 private tow truck. Officers were taking statements from a bewildered Mr. Harrison and a tearful, resolute Mrs. Henderson, who held a wrinkled flyer exposing the Cayman Islands account. Alex and Pops were 30 miles away, parked in a nondescript industrial lot. The Mustang sat under a tarp, the final crucial piece of evidence. "The whole town knows by now, kid," Pops said, scrolling through local news alerts on his phone. "They're calling it the Midnight Coast Siege." The footage from Henderson's doorbell cam is viral. It shows Veronica Thorne directing men in tactical gear to destroy property. Nobody's asking if you're a criminal, they're asking why the HOA chairwoman is acting like a mob boss. The fight had shifted from physical survival to legal warfare. Alex had 1 hour before his scheduled meeting with the FBI. He needed an unassailable narrative. Scene. The FBI briefing Alex sat in a sterile conference room with 2 agents. Agent Parker, 40s, sharp, reserved, focused on finance, and Agent Ruiz, 30s, methodical, focused on RICO violations. Alex spread the photographic evidence on the table, the forged A2 signatures, the internal board minutes, the $135 million reserve fund, and the transfer slips to Coastal Aesthetics Holding. "Say, the core of the fraud is simple," Alex explained, tapping the reserve fund. "They engineered a document, the Amati 2, to create unappealable, high-value fines that routed money into an unauthorized special assessment reserve. They cycled that money through Vincent's domestic company, Paradise Land and Maintenance, and then offshore to this Cayman entity. My car, my sapphire blue Mustang, was their final mistake. It was the physical embodiment of the code name, Project Sapphire. Agent Parker leaned forward, his focus solely on the offshore transfer. The amount moved to this holding company is significant. And the handwritten note, Project Sapphire, Mustang. It's the definitive link between the trivial HOA violation and the international money laundering scheme. We need to connect the seized funds directly to the victims, Agent Ruiz stated. We'll get an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts, but the local authorities are handling the board termination. The community needs to take back control. Seen the emergency recall meeting. That evening, the Valencia Gates Community Center was packed. The mood wasn't polite anger. It was raw fury. Every victim of a baseless fine was present, demanding blood. Mr. Hayes, the HOA management CEO, presided over the meeting, a sweat stain blooming on the collar of his shirt. Veronica and Vincent Thorne sat stiffly on the dais, flanked by a phalanx of expensive, stony-faced lawyers. They looked utterly isolated, stripped of their power by the public humiliation of the previous night. Hayes began, his voice shaking. We understand the distress caused by the unauthorized and highly irregular actions of the Thorne family last night. A woman's voice cut through the room, sharp and strong. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the victim who had nearly lost her house over a mailbox flag. She stood up holding a copy of Alex's flyer. Irregular? She spat. You called the color of my mailbox flag a violation, Mr. Hayes. That fine levied under your fraudulent addendum was designed to steal my equity. You processed the paperwork that enabled this. You are complicit. The crowd erupted into shouts of fraud and resign. Hayes looked desperately at the Thorne's lawyer, who stood up, tapping the microphone. If I may, the claims made in these anonymous flyers are unverified and defamatory. The board has initiated a lawsuit against Mr. Alex Vance for criminal trespass, assault, and destruction of property. We advise the community to await the outcome of the courts. Suddenly, the doors swung open and Alex walked in. He wasn't wearing his mechanic clothes. He was in a simple pressed shirt, carrying his now infamous satchel. Behind him stood Agent Parker and Agent Ruiz, their official FBI identification clearly visible on their lanyards. The room went dead silent. Alex walked to the front, placing the final pieces of evidence on the table. A copy of the frozen asset injunction and the original offshore transfer slip. The court doesn't need to wait, Alex said, his voice ringing with authority, because the fraud is confirmed. On behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I can confirm that the funds related to the Special Assessment Reserve ARC projects have been frozen under federal injunction. The funds were linked to an international shell corporation used for the purpose of systematic theft and money laundering. He looked directly at Veronica Thorne, who was now weeping silent, furious tears. He then looked at Hayes. Mr. Hayes, Alex continued, the AA2 was illegal from its inception. Every fine levied under it is void. The total value of the seizure fund is approximately $10 million. That money belongs to the residents of Valencia Gates. Hayes, realizing he was about to be federally indicted, looked at the Thornes, then stood up, raising his hands in surrender. I was pressured. I was instructed by the board majority. I have full documentation of their coercion and the instructions to process all fines, the community gasped. Hayes had just turned state's evidence. The lawyers immediately stood to object, but Agent Ruiz walked up to the dais and leaned down, speaking directly to Vincent Thorne. Mr. Thorne, we have a warrant for your arrest based on the charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and bank fraud. Vincent Thorne, the man who believed money bought immunity, collapsed back into his chair, the weight of the moment crushing him. Veronica Thorne watched, her eyes dead. The perfect, terrifying mask of the HOA queen shattered forever. The final beat, justice and irony 3 months later. Alex Vance was standing in his newly restored garage, now the official uncompensated Valencia Gates community ombudsman. The Mustang, the original Project Sapphire, gleamed under his work lights. The community had successfully recalled the entire board, replaced the management company, and initiated a class action lawsuit to recover damages. Vincent Thorne and Mr. Hayes were facing serious federal charges. Veronica Thorne, surprisingly, was facing only local obstruction and conspiracy charges, but the social and financial humiliation had exiled her entirely. Her designer house, the ultimate symbol of her status, was listed for foreclosure. Alex picked up a single, crisp white envelope that had been slipped under his door. It was from the newly formed resident-led HOA committee. He opened it. Inside was a single document, a notice of payment in full. It was a final, official receipt confirming the full and immediate payment of the fraudulent $4,500 lien placed on his Mustang under the voided Architectural Aesthetics Addendum, AA-2. Alex didn't smile. He flipped the receipt over and read the memo line, a detail the new board had added at his request. The source of the funds used to pay off the illegal fine. The final official release of the lien on the Mustang was listed clearly. It wasn't Alex's money. It was a single disbursement check from the seized and restored Special Assessment Reserve Fund. The very funds the Thornes had created to rob the community were now used, legally and publicly, to pay the last symbolic debt the fraud had created. Alex took the final lien notice, crumpled it into a tight ball, and tossed it into the nearest trash bin. The community was saved. The thieves were caught. And the car was finally unequivocally his own. He walked over to the Mustang, ran a hand over the sapphire blue paint, and fired up the V8. The roar this time was pure freedom.